And welcome back to our panel discussion, The Future of Government Data Centers, sponsored by Avnet Government Solutions and NetApp, here on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com. Our guests today are Sean Kingsbury, CIO of the Recovery, Accountability, and Transparency Board, Kimberly Hancher, the CIO of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, Andre Mendez, Director of Global Operations for the Broadcasting Board of Governors, and Darren House, Director of Solutions Management at Avnet Government Solutions, and Raj Rana, Senior Systems Engineering Manager for the Partner Ecosystem at NetApp. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. And let's go deeper into the future now. We've talked about how the infrastructure might look, now, and how it might look in a couple of years from now. And we've talked a lot about data. Let's talk about applications, what agencies want to do in terms of mission delivery, which is what applications accomplish. And then we can talk about how you want to configure your data centers and new technology to support what it is you want to do from a mission standpoint, which I think is really where the government kind of begins and ends. And so, Sean, you have a sunset mission, but I got a feeling what you do is going to take hold across government, the idea of somehow being able to really know what's going on with spending. I mean, that's the Data Act, that's the administration initiative, that's congressional initiative. So tell us what you envision application-wise in the future and how your infrastructure can support that.
From our perspective, it's all about the data. And it's interesting how it's multiple layers to that. When you look at how much data that we consume today. When I say we, I'm talking personal and corporate and federal. I mean, because, it's that nexus now where are the lines between and patterns of what we do at home versus what we do in the office. It kind of goes back to when Microsoft first started, right? When they started to get into the office space, right? People wanted to be able to do in the office what they could do at home, right? So that whole nexus is still there. So there's this urge for data, and when you look at from a federal standpoint, how much data we actually consume, and because of the price of the cost of storage has dropped so drastically and continues to drop, we have to do a better job of being responsible about what are we actually storing, because we're going to get to a point where it's great that we can store all of this data, but now how do we deal with that, right, when we hit a wall, right? So, but looking at it from a data standpoint and service delivery, we're looking at things like entity resolution, being able to get faster answers to questions to the analysts. And now you start to look at what's the best platform to do certain workloads.
And just before you go on, entity resolution relates to identifying
people, companies and people that are associated
to a much more certain degree than you can with conventional means, right?
Yes, I mean, literally using that, it gets into computer-based learning, right? To start to actually derive results and letting the computer do the job based on rules, and and when you start to do that against large amounts of data, that requires lots of processing, and then you have to be able to. You can't wait for the computer. The expectation is, the analysts aren't looking at the data like, yes, I'm looking at, petabytes of data. They're looking at it like, I have a question of this data and I need to get an answer back, and I don't expect to see a bar, right? You have to be able to deliver workloads based on the business requirements. So what we have to do now, that's when you start to get into looking at what workloads should run in what places. So let's talk about VDI for as an example. So what our private cloud infrastructure is run in our data center on-prem, but all of the VDIs are run off our SAN storage, which is variable storage infrastructure. Virtual desktops running off a variable storage infrastructure, which means based on the workload and what's going on, it's going to switch between solid state or other, right, based on what we're doing. And now you start to get into connectivity, like again, my partners we're talking about. You can't wait to access a desktop, right? So now we start to talk about 10 gigabit interconnects between processing and storage and what have you. Now, if I were to deliver that from a service provider, there's a price I'm going to have to pay, right? So we are looking at, and I think anyone that's getting in this space needs to think about what are the requirements to access the data, meaning what is the business, because business drives technology, technology enables business to meet its goals and objectives. So like I said, we're heavy in that space, and we're always looking at ways to optimize that. And it's actually an exciting time.
And Andre, what about the BBG? I mean, you've got a lot of data that exists as the messages that are coming in video and radio from the federal government. So what do you see as the application environment that you need to configure your data centers for?
So there are really two different types of data that we have to deal with. And one, it's the type of data that everybody has to deal with, back office, files, emails, and all that. And that, by and large, is commodity, so we're just going to put it out there in the cloud and let it operate that way. To a certain degree, it's somewhat irrelevant to our mission, right? It just enables, the processing. But then the really important data is the content. Right, and for two particular reasons, right? On a temporal mode, besides the fact that we have to create the content and broadcast it immediately, there is a tremendous need to store it on a long-term basis for two main reasons. One, because more and more people demonstrate a tremendous interest in the long tail, right? An event that happened 10 years ago and that only you could care about, but by the way, it's indexed, it's in there. And the other one is actually leveraging that content into future programming, right? You have a crisis in the Middle East. And what is the thing that you want to do if you want to do an historical perspective of that? You want to go back and look at every single thing that has happened, right? And so you need to have very quick access to all of the footage, all of the audio for the past 30 years of the repeated number of crises, right? So that you can have a very compelling content that you create. So then you get into metadata, right? The dirty word, metadata that allows you to actually leverage your data in a much more, concise way, fast way, efficient way. Because what you want to do is with every single piece of content that we have, you want it to be annotated, right? So that you have a description of what it is, who is in it, and so on and so forth. Being able to do that on a human basis has become absolutely important. Absolutely impossible. The number of sources, the amount of content that is generated on a daily basis is so huge that we need to rely on computers to actually do facial recognition, do audio identification, and then annotate the metadata based on events, sites, people, timelines, and so on and so forth. So for us, that is going to be an extremely important component. Fortunately enough, because that is not in real time and can be done offline, it's something that, again, can be put on the cloud and processed that way. But for us, the component of the data, both from a contribution to new content standpoint and consumption of old content, is absolutely essential.
So Raj, as people think about storage, they probably have to think about new types of storage to take advantage of what the processors and the tools can do, which is solid state at a higher level of hierarchy and in greater quantity. But also it sounds like from what we've heard, the network is also part of that equation, and deduplication and caching at each end and so forth, so that you get the efficiency from the hardware you do have.
Correct.
Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so there's a couple of comments that were made, right? I mean, I think Andre referenced earlier that his core mission is not IT. And it's not that IT gets in the way, but if you had to spend $1, you're going to spend it on furthering your mission. And IT should definitely help enable that, as Sean alluded to. So from our perspective, there's that description of the wall, that as you continue to store more and more, there's that wall that you hit. Well, our job as a best-of-breed storage provider is to either push the wall further out or reduce the wall altogether. And so we want so built into the technology is intelligence to be able to automatically determine, okay, if we have if there is data that's being read that we need, well, we're going to promote that into solid state disk, to your point. And that all happens transparently on the back end. That doesn't require additional administrators. Technology to continue to scale out so that we can continue to add as events come on. If there's events that are occurring internationally or things like that drive up the demand for storage, we can seamlessly continue to expand that pool. As we start to continue to store data for extended periods of time, how can we ensure that that data is available regardless of whether it happened 10 days, 10 months, or 10 years ago? So all of these things are things that we've built into the technology to ensure that the folks that are focusing on the mission can drive that mission forward. There was, there are comments around workloads, and I think workloads are another things. As you start to consolidate your data, and as you start to consolidate your data centers and start to bring things down, what you'll find is that you have workloads that are mixed inside your infrastructure. And you're right, in certain things, file services and the like, that may make sense for you to move out into the cloud, but you may want to keep that as well, which is a completely different performance characteristics than, say, VDI, which has a completely different characteristic than, say, video processing. So you're starting to see multiple things access, multiple workloads, multiple use cases and ways to access the data that your agency is leveraging to achieve their mission, and that all needs to occur transparently on the back end. So builds in things like deduplication to minimize the amount of storage, compression, efficient copies. All of those types of things are ways that we're helping to reduce the wall, if you will, to ensure that the storage can continue to grow and we can continue to help the agencies meet their mission in an agile fashion.
So maybe it's only a hurdle, but not quite a brick wall. Andre, follow up before we go to Kim?
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, it's interesting because we see all this need now, in real time for all of us because the amount of data is just so enormous, right? But this is not a new concept. I mean, hierarchical storage has been around for a long time, and so what you're seeing is the need to absolutely optimize, what's on. It used to be what was on spinning disk, which was on tape versus was on deep storage, right? And now it is what's on memory, right, in cache versus solid state, and so on and so forth.
Right.
So that hierarchical storage concept has always been there. It's just that the data has gone so enormous, and the prices have become so low that it just generated a different magnitude of a problem for us to deal with.
It's like Gmail, you're always at 7%, no matter how much it builds up.
Exactly. I think that the assumption has got to be that on an ongoing basis, future-wise, you're going to have unlimited computing capacity, unlimited storage capacity, and unlimited connectivity capacity, faster than anybody could ever imagine. And that should, needs to drive all of the business models because that is where it's going to go.
All right, Kimberly, at EEOC, what is your future application environment that you're thinking about, and are you having the data center infrastructure to support that?
Well, in contrast to unlimited, we're extremely limited. We really have a lot of limitations because we're a very, very poor agency, comparatively speaking. But we've been focusing on the Open Data Initiative by this administration, and that means that a lot more of our data is going to be made available to researchers, to people in academic community, and to Joe Public. And so we're working on. We're a paper-based organization. So our first challenge is get the data in electronic form. And so we do have a digital strategy.
And that doesn't mean PDFs, that means machine readable.
Yes, it does. That's right. And when you're working with paper-based evidence and paper folders, you got to get into the electronic mode. So we're working very hard to catch up there. And then the network is the other big thing for us, being a geographically distributed organization. Having a network that provides sufficient capability for data, voice, and the killer, video, that's a challenge. And
increasingly, video will be the medium by which cases are heard
and
and talked about.
And let me tell
conducted.
you, we use video teleconferencing every single day, every single hour, and it is a resource, a scarce resource in our environment. We have just conference room-based video, so people are vying for that conference room because it has the video teleconferencing in it.
All right, and so Darren, we have about a minute left. We'll give you the final comment today. How does this all wrap up into what you're seeing government-wide in terms of customers asking you for help in data center optimization and futurizing their infrastructure?
Well, it's a good thing I talk fast. So there's so many different things you could go through on this whole topic, but I think there's a couple key things that we want to bring in. The first one is it can't be overstated the dependency of the data on the infrastructure design that's done and how that impacts the application that accesses the data that lets the user get work done. So there's always that dependency, and that cannot be forgotten because the data is important, but the infrastructure and how you approach that design is critical to be able to get that data to do what you want for it. The second thing is a comment about metadata. I think metadata is going to be a huge thing about this in terms of distributed storage, in terms of analytics, in terms of categorization of data, and focused analytics based on those things that will have a large impact for agencies. And then last thing, with this, with the metadata, we're talking about software-defined everything.
Sure.
Because it's the applications that use software and understanding about the data and the network and the storage and all these pieces that tie together. It's the glue that will tie a lot of these pieces together for really garnering the value of that data and how you can move that data through systems to get the mission done and be able to improve upon what you're trying to do.
All right, improve upon what you're trying to do is a good note to end on. Our guests today are Sean Kingsbury, CIO of the Recovery, Accountability, and Transparency Board, Kimberly Hansher, CIO of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, Raj Rana, the Senior Systems Engineering Manager for the Partner Ecosystem at NetApp, Darren House, Director of Solutions Management at Avnet Government Solutions, and Andre Mendez, the Director of Global Operations for the Broadcasting Board of Governors. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin, here on the Future of Government Data Centers, sponsored by Avnet Government Solutions and NetApp on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM.